My name is Mackenzie Lyon. I am the Vice President of External Affairs for Perpetua Resources. And I'm an Idahoan, and this project is one that I've been involved with now for just about 9 years. And as an Idahoan, it is one that I am very proud of and very excited to get it moving forward here for the benefit of our state and the benefit of our nation. So with that, my plan today is just to go over a quick summary of the project and then talk about some of the updates that we've had in the last couple of months. So for those of you who are familiar or aren't familiar with the project, we're located in central Idaho, about 4 hours from Boise. And we are a mining company with a very unique vision and a plan. If I were to summarize this project, I would say that the Stibnite Gold Project is unique for 3 reasons. The first is that we are the next generation of responsible, modern American mining that prioritizes community partnerships and environmental responsibility. The second is that our project is located on an abandoned mine site that is in desperate need of help. And our project is designed to make the site better than it is today. And finally, that the Stibnite Gold Project will be the only domestically sourced mined source of the critical mineral antimony, which will play an important role in emerging low-carbon battery storage technology. And quite honestly, one of the questions that has captured my attention from the very beginning in my involvement in this project is, if not at Stibnite, an area that has been mined for over 100 years and left in desperate condition and need of environmental repair, if not here, then where? This really is the perfect opportunity to bring mining back home, to find both environmental uplift and environmental solutions that we need for our country and our clean energy goals. So, and I think that value and that vision is very much who we are as a company. From the very beginning, we've dedicated ourselves, it's in our DNA, to be this new wave of modern, responsible American mining. For us, transparency and accountability have guided our interaction with our communities. Diversity and inclusion define leadership and all the way through the company. And we're investing in environmental solutions because it's the right thing to do, including we're prioritizing our environmental, social, and governance policies and actions, which have included a 2018 community agreement between us and 8 of our local communities. The agreement initiated regular meetings between local community leaders and the leadership of the company. And those meetings will go on, are guaranteed throughout the life of the project. And it also started a profit-sharing community endowment to ensure that the economic benefits of the project are both shared and sustained. Now, Stibnite has a really remarkable history. So the Stibnite Mining District has a history that starts way back in 1899, when mining first started here for gold and silver. But it was on the eve of World War II when the United States did not have a source of tungsten and antimony that we deemed necessary for our war efforts if we were going to get into war. And so the government set out to find it, and they found it at Stibnite, both tungsten and antimony. And they asked the then Bradley Mining Company to produce those 2 elements for the war. And almost overnight, this small little operation grew to a town of 1,000 people, all working for the war effort. And in fact, it was the men and women at Stibnite, Idaho, that produced the majority of the tungsten and antimony that we used in World War II. And for that reason, they were credited with having shortened World War II by a year and saving 1 million American lives in doing so. And the reason I always bring up this story is because supply chain issues are not new. In fact, It is these supply chain issues that we can look back to our history and really learn the lesson of just how significant they are to our country and our national security, and the impact it has when we can produce them here locally. But of course, since most of the mining that occurred here at Stibnite happened long before the environmental regulations or even the ethos that we have today, it was left behind in a serious need of repair. So today, there are over 10.5 million tons of unlined legacy tailings and waste rock that degrade water quality, with arsenic and antimony leaching into both ground and surface water. The East Fork of the South Fork of the Salmon River flows into the abandoned Yellow Pine mining pit, which has blocked salmon migration to over 30 miles of habitat for the last 80+ years. But between 2002 and 2012, there were 3 CERCLA decrees signed between the former operators at Stibnite and the governmental entities that were involved. And those agreements really absolved all of those parties from any future responsibility for the environmental conditions at Stibnite. So this means that without private industry solutions, these environmental problems will most likely continue unabated. And so while we have this brownfield site, so a site that has been mined before and abandoned, we also know that there is a robust mineral resource still available at Stibnite. So our project economics are built on 4.8 million ounces of gold, which also then allow for the production of the 148 million pound of antimony reserve and the restoration of the legacy features at Stibnite. So we have always known that if modern mineral redevelopment were going to happen at Stibnite, we were going to need to design a project that addressed the abandoned environmental legacies and bring value to our communities. And we are very proud that our plan has been designed to leave the area better than it is today by addressing those legacies, while also providing a responsible source for the critical mineral antimony. So our plan has been designed to address many of the legacy impacts and features early on in the project. So in the first years of construction, we will solve for the largest source of sedimentation in the watershed. We will also pick up, reprocess, and safely store the legacy tailings, which will improve water quality. And we will also reconnect fish passage in the first years of mining through a fish passageway, and then rebuild and restore the river starting in year 7. And this allows for miles of additional access for Chinook, steelhead, and bull trout, both at the very beginning of the project, but also solves the problem permanently. We're also really proud that our project will allow for the reconstruction of the East Fork, South Fork of the Salmon River, and that it goes beyond the reclamation standard. We are not just creating a river that in a rock-lined riprap channel that goes from point A to point B. Instead, we were really challenged by many of the consultants that we've brought on board who are experts in river restoration, saying, well, what if you allowed this river to meander and gave it a floodplain and allowed it to web in order and to weave and to braid in smaller streams in order to create multiple levels of fish habitat. And so the uplift that we're looking at here over the current river conditions is really something that I think is a jewel of this project and represents so much of the opportunity that we have here. And then at the same time, one of the most unique features of our project is the critical mineral antimony. And I want to speak for a little bit about why antimony is critical and a recent agreement that we have signed to help fuel the clean energy or some of the clean energy technology that we need in our country. So as mentioned, we will be the sole domestically mined source of the critical mineral antimony. And antimony is critical to our everyday lives. Most of us just aren't aware of where it is. So from munitions and primers that the Department of Defense absolutely needs, just like they needed back in World War II, to the energy and technology industries, where products like solar panels and semiconductors rely on antimony. Antimony is critical for our economic and our national security. And yet, we do not have a domestic supply. And that is why it is one of the listed 35 critical minerals. Because today, antimony is under the control predominantly of the Chinese. So this has been the case over the last 100 years for the most part, but particularly over the last decade, where the Chinese government has systematically taken even greater control over the antimony market by purchasing resources across the globe and the processing facilities as well. So last year, or in 2020, the USGS noted that 90% of the global supply of antimony came from China, Russia, and Tajikistan. And about 81% of the antimony that we consume in this country came from foreign sources or was imported. The rest came from recycled sources. And looking to our allies doesn't always offer a clear opportunity, in part because along with Australia and Canada and the EU and Japan, and most of our allies list antimony as a critical resource or a critical mineral on their own list. But many of those resources are also controlled by the Chinese today. So it is one of those things where we are paying great attention to where it's used, because it absolutely is the unsung hero of the critical minerals. So as I mentioned, in defense, it plays a critical role in the munitions and primers. It's also used to coat every single uniform of our men and women in service, both because it acts as a fire retardant, but also because it helps shield from infrared detection. On the technology side, as mentioned, it's in semiconductors and in most electronics. It's in your iPhone as a glass clarifying agent. And then on the energy side, whether it's use in wiring or the insulation around wiring, or in lead acid batteries and solar panels and wind turbines, and then also in this new emerging technology around liquid metal battery, grid storage batteries. I'll just note that this year, in the White House's 100-day review of supply chains, it was noted, and I think this graph is a really interesting visualization of the Chinese control over all of our critical minerals, but in particular antimony, which you'll see there circled in red. So when we look at kind of the bigger picture around critical minerals, China certainly dominates much of the market, but particularly for that of antimony. And then I think it's also important to note that our resource, or our reserve of antimony, is one of the largest economic reserves in the world, not controlled by the Chinese. So this project could supply an average of 35% of US demand over the first 6 years of the project, putting us back in control of our supply chain for clean energy, for defense materials, and for technology. And in fact, I think it was really significant that through the executive order on strengthening supply chains, and then also the Earthshot goals set both by President Biden and Secretary Granholm, that this nation has a very clear set of objectives. We need to secure the building blocks required for a cleaner, safer, more secure future. And Secretary Granholm in this quote, I think, was very clear. So that in order to get to a net zero carbon emission grid by 2035, which was our climate change goal, we can't just produce more wind and solar. You have to have grid level battery storage. Or you can produce all the solar and wind you want, but without that battery storage, it'll never be able to be used on the grid. And so that battery storage is absolutely that missing piece. And she says here that not only is it the missing piece, but that battery storage supply chain needs to be done right here at home. And it needs to be done here at home because it is safer, it is more secure, and it can be easier to adopt this technology and control this technology when we can produce it here at home. So that a fully integrated supply chain, from innovation to the mineral production to the mining, and then to the adoption of the technology, it is faster and more responsible and more secure if we do it here at home. And it is very encouraging to see our administration linking mining and mineral production as a part of these supply chain needs. And so with that, one of the most exciting announcements from for our company over the last couple of months is that in August of this year, we announced a long-term partnership to provide a portion of the antimony from the Stibnite Gold Project to Ambri. Now, Ambri is an American company that started through professors and his students at MIT, and a technology that they're commercializing currently for a stationary grid-level battery storage. And now this battery technology that they're producing is unique. And it's unique because it relies simply on a combination of calcium and antimony. It is scalable up to 2 gigawatt hours. And these batteries are reliable in any environment. So there isn't that risk of thermal combustion or heat loss as there is with the lithium ion comparable. In addition, they are already 30 to 50% lower in cost than the lithium ion comparable batteries in the 2020 to 2023 market. And they also have a 20-year lifespan, which is about twice as long as the others that are coming on the market. And I think an additional added value here is that Ambri has committed to US manufacturing. And as with Perpetua as a part of that supply chain, it provides them with not only a secure source, an American source of antimony, but also a source of antimony that they know meets our consumers' desire for both ethically and environmentally produced materials. And so with our current agreement with Ambri, our antimony will power approximately 13 gigawatt hours of battery capacity on a daily cycle. This is the equivalent of 8 times the battery storage that came onto the market in 2020. And enough storage to power 1 million US homes with solar power for the 20-year lifespan of this battery. And that's incredible. I mean, that's more homes than there are in Idaho when you think about it. And this partnership furthers our vision of being a company that helps bring solutions. And it directly underscores the role that mining in America can play in saving the world's climate change, or in solving the world's climate change challenges. And it also connects the restoration and the operations of the Stibnite Gold Project to climate change solutions. And so then very quickly on kind of where we are at the moment on our permitting of the project. So we started, as some of you may be aware, permitting, or after 6 years of engineering and design and talking with stakeholders and review of the project for 6 years. And then we entered into the formal NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act, that reviews and eventually gives us a green light to move forward. We've now been in that NEPA process for 5 years. In 2020, the US Forest Service, our lead agency in that process, issued the draft environmental impact statement for public comment. We received almost 10,000 comments on this project. About 85% of those individually submitted comments supported this project moving forward. And yet we also saw in some of those comments and in our own review some changes that needed to be made to help improve the environmental outcomes of the project. So now we anticipate that the Forest Service will issue a supplemental draft EIS in August of 2020 that is narrowly focused or targeted on what was alternative 2 of our project and is now our preferred action in comparison with the improvements and compares the two different access routes to the project. From there, we then anticipate a record of decision in 2023 or the first half of 2023 and moving into production by 2027. And to step back for a moment, I do want to comment on the draft EIS that was published in August of 2020. So this document was really able to help confirm the approach that we've taken, that by addressing legacies at Stibnite, we can help improve some of the conditions at site today. So whether that is in providing, additional habitat and access and reach for the anadromous fish up at Stibnite today, or improving water quality. We know that the project is designed and it can work to meet those goals. Now, the other thing though, as I mentioned, is that in listening to all the comments on the project, it also illuminated that there could be changes to help improve the environmental outcomes. So after listening to stakeholder feedback, to agency feedback, to tribal feedback, Perpetua then submitted a series of project improvements to the Forest Service that reduced our project footprint, that improved water quality to the point where long-term water treatment would no longer be necessary, and reduced water temperature significantly back down to baseline conditions, if not below baseline conditions in some areas of site. And so this refined project will now move forward, as I mentioned, through this targeted and refined supplemental draft EIS, to which there will be another public comment period and additional public review, which does help at the end of the day strengthen the administrative record around the project, and certainly allows us to have a project that better reflects stakeholder engagement. So at the end of the day, as I mentioned, this puts us on track for seeing a final record of decision in the first half of 2023, the ancillary permits and financing also in 2023, and then moving into construction by 2024, and then commercial operations and the beginning of ongoing restoration starting in 2027. And now in closing, before we open it up to any questions, two things. One question we get a lot, and I think that is starting to rise to a point of national dialogue around supply chain and around climate change is, well, why should we be mining in America, and why critical minerals in America? And I think simply put, the answer is because we can do it better here at home. And mining in America provides us control over our future. Domestic production gives us direct access to the materials that we need, brings with it American jobs and American infrastructure, and puts the social and economic conditions of mining in our hands. And I think the administration in particular is starting to recognize this. And this country needs a path forward on climate. And we are now very excited that the Stibnite Gold Project is a part of that solution. And once again, confirming that we're here, ready to help and ready to be a part of the solution, whether it's for this abandoned mine site or for our climate needs going forward. And I would just note that it's never too soon to start talking about a public comment period. So as I mentioned, we do anticipate a public comment period in the first quarter of next year. And it's going to be very important that anyone who is interested in this project has their voice heard. So once we get closer, we will be making sure that everyone has all of the information on how to comment and how to tell the agencies how you feel about this project. In the meantime, if there are specific questions, we have office hours once a month. It's a great opportunity to come meet some of our staff. And we're also willing to do briefings to any group or subset of people. So if you have a group or an entity that you think should know more or that should be involved in the conversation, just let us know. We are really happy to bring Zoom to anywhere and any group of people to further the conversations about this project. And you can still get involved. So, sharing in the story and telling your network just how important this project is or what you feel about it, and sharing your support. is extraordinarily valuable to us at this stage of the project. So with that, I thank everybody for their time. And Alyssa, if we have any questions, I'm happy to take some.
We had one question from Hugo, but it was already answered during the presentation.
Oh, excellent. Well, great. So I see one question about how many jobs we anticipate creating. So during construction, which is about a 3-year period, we anticipate an average of about 600 direct jobs. And then during the lifespan of the mine, so about 15 years, we anticipate about 500 direct jobs, 500 to 600, really depending on where we are in the process. And those are just direct jobs. In Idaho, we anticipate that there's a multiplier of about 2.5 for every direct job. So it really can get a lot bigger. But I will note that part of the remoteness of this project means that we do anticipate housing people on site for a 2-week on, 2-week off shift. This really allows not only the safe transportation of our workforce, but also allows us to pull a workforce. We anticipate about a third of our workforce will come from the direct region of about 3 counties around the project. Another third might commute from other areas in Idaho or around the West, and about a third might move into the area.
And Mackenzie, we just received a question from Tanner about housing.
Housing. So was that about how do we anticipate housing? So we will have a housing facility on site that will include, not only the dormitory style bedrooms, but also full-time kitchen, recreational opportunities, etc. Really planning for people being up there for 2 weeks at a time and then coming home. We're also looking at how to help the local region as employees would be, if we have employees moving locally, how to address some of that with the local region as well. So the question about why the Forest Service didn't make the decision at the end on the draft EIS. So that was in part because of the need to respond. So how the NEPA process works, it's iterative. So in putting out the draft environmental impact statement, the intention was not only so that the public could review it, but also that there has to be meaningful listening to that information and using it as a part of the process to improve the project. And we felt that we were going to have a stronger project at the end of the day if we made some of the suggestions or the suggested changes that we heard from key stakeholders, whether it was the tribe or environmental groups or some of our local community members saying, water temperature and water quality need to be improved, and so does the project footprint. And so by being able to take our preferred design, which then in the DEIS was alternative 2, making some of these changes to the project that improved those environmental outcomes, that plan will now move forward into the supplemental and have only 2 other alternatives that really evaluate the access route in. And at the end of the day, by going to a supplemental draft EIS, it helps strengthen the administrative record on the project and kind of meet some of that stakeholder demand for project improvements and additional transparency and changes in the project. And we do not, so this next question is whether or not we have a general contractor or developer chosen. We do not have for housing. We do not have that chosen at this time. I will suggest if there's anyone interested in kind of future opportunities to become a vendor or supplier with the company, on our website, the very top, so perpetuaresources.com, there's a button that's called Connect. And through that button, you'll find an intake form for vendors and suppliers. And that's a great way to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do. And we can either connect you with some of our development team working on those issues, but we will absolutely keep you in our database of people that we can reconnect with when we have opportunities come to the table. So I'm going to start with this other question. What is our plan to secure financial assurance and maintain the tailings after mine operations are no longer productive? So it's a great question. I think it's important to note that financial assurance has changed dramatically over the last decade. So the financial assurance that we will have to commit to as a company will be determined and finalized after the project's final design has been approved. And then the dollar figure that we as a company have to put into a financial tool like a bond or a trust, for example, to secure that funding for the agencies will be determined on an actual cost of the reclamation and restoration work that needs to be done. And it's reviewed on a 1 to 5 year basis. So before we can begin, before we can lift that first shovel, we have to have the money set aside to ensure that should something ever happen to Perpetua, that there is funding to restore the project. That dollar figure will include everything from calculating at Davis-Bacon wages, the workforce that would need to be required to do the project, to every pickup truck and tree that would need to be planted. So it's a very robust calculation. And that is fairly new in the financial assurance kind of world and calculation. And that financial assurance would maintain until the agencies release it and the agencies determine that Perpetua has completed all of the planning that was required in our mitigation and our restoration planning for the site and under the regulatory environment that we're under. So the governmental agencies hold on to that money until they decide that it is no longer needed. And the tailing storage facility and other facilities on site are all designed so that at the end of the day, at the end of closure, they are self-contained and would not need ongoing maintenance into the future. And I see the question, I think there's one last question on potential share dilution. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Alyssa grab your information and connect you with our investor relations and finance vice president, Jessica Largent. I think she's better to answer that question than I am. But it will take a financing. So before we can construct. The nice thing about the project is that we do see that return, I believe starting in year 3 or 4, where the project moves into the black. But I'll let Jess answer those questions for you.
Sorry, Mackenzie, there's one more question in the chat box.
So how will Perpetua mitigate our own impacts? So, you know, you use the term here, toxic waste. And I think it's important to note that the material leaving our processing facility, it has very much, well, so one, the cyanide that is used in our processing facility is diluted and destroyed down to what is probably going to be below 10 parts per million before it ever goes to our tailings facility. That 10 parts per million is well below the 50 part per million that is considered safe for wildlife. And cyanide then degrades very quickly in the environment as well. Additionally, the arsenic that would be left over in some of those tailings through the processing facility is actually locked up. It's made water insoluble. Whereas today, and then stored in our tailings storage facility. That tailings storage facility is double lined, it is fully capped, and it is buttressed by 65 million tons of rock, bringing the safety of that facility to a factor of safety that is at a 5.9. What is required is 1.5. So magnitudes larger, and in its construction and engineering, safer than what is required by law. But I will also note that when we talk about you know, what will be at Stibnite in the future, it's really also important to talk about what's at Stibnite today. Because today at Stibnite, there are more than 10.5 million tons of legacy waste rock and tailings that are left in this valley unlined. We are identifying that at certain times of the year, arsenic in groundwater is 700 times the drinking water standard. And we can change that. And we can bring the resources to pick up the tailings that are currently degrading water quality in this valley and pick them up, reprocess, and in doing so, lock up that arsenic and safely store the tailings in this facility. It is really the only viable solution to improving water quality at Stibnite today. And I think that that is all of the questions we have, unless anyone else has any other questions. All right. Well, again, I appreciate everyone, coming and listening. Again, I just want to reiterate that if you have specific questions, if you want to talk to anyone on our team, give us a call. Send us an email, community@Perpetua Resources or perpetua.com.us will get you there. I know Alyssa should have your emails after you signed up today. We'll send you an email immediately after this webinar. And then Lawrence, I'll make sure that I connect you with Jess on your questions about shares. So if not, thank you for your time and interest in this project. And again, we're always happy to keep the conversation going. So thank you for your time and have a great afternoon.